police silence also.
We're going.
You ready, Trevor?
There's probably only.
Yeah. Call the meeting to order. Those who care to, please stand for an opening prayer and pledge of allegiance. Mr. Cameron, if you would.
Thank you. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, and thank you for the beautiful weather, Lord, and just thank you for this city and all that you're doing, Lord, the vision and direction and the favor that you've placed upon us. And I pray, God, that you just guide and direct us in all that we do and say, and always stay humble about it. Guide and direct us in Jesus' name. Amen.
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, before we get started, we have some recognition we would like to start the meeting off with. First, I'd like to recognize Mr. Michael Forrester, who is here with us tonight. As a part of his senior project, Mr. Forrester chose to focus on improving the security at the AMP and the Republic Veterans Memorial due to a lot of recent vandalism that had taken place. Mr. Forrester, through his fundraising efforts, raised $905 toward the purchase of a security camera system for the facilities at J.R. Martin Park. The camera system was installed by Michael with the help of park and facility maintenance staff and has already assisted in the investigation of one vandalism incident. We want to thank Mr. Forrester for all of his work on that project and his commitment to the City of Republic. That wasn't meant to be. We have a plaque here that says 2018 Republic Citizen Award, Michael Forrester. Thank you for your efforts to improve safety and security at the AMP Republic Veterans Memorial. Can you step over here or over here? Maybe over here.
Yeah.
You're good. Go ahead. And also, Chief Lawton wanted to give you a challenge coin on behalf of the Republic Police Department. Now, it's important to keep that with you, because if an officer pulls up, they pull out their challenge coin, you have to have yours on you, or you have to buy them a Coke or something like that. So thank you again. Thank you, sir. And now, Chief Compton, if you will please come up, we're going to hand out some life-saving award presentations.
That's correct, Mayor. We have 6 awards to hand out tonight. Engineer Adam Brown is at a track meet with his kids, so he couldn't be here. The first one goes to Captain Tim King, Engineer Sterling Flag, and Firefighter Derek Barr. They responded to a call last year in the Island Green subdivision for a gentleman that was having a heart attack. When they arrived, Corporal Sells or Sergeant Sells and Corporal Luke Perry were on the scene, and they had started CPR. Our crews took over CPR. They inserted an airway, and this gentleman, to our knowledge, has made a full recovery. Actually, come back around as they were going back into the hospital. So, Tim, Sterling, Eric, and if you notice, this is Tim's 3rd life save. Tim will be on duty tomorrow. Just saying, you're a numbers person. When we're done, we'll step out front.
Sterling Flag. How are you?
Good. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Derek Barr. This guy. That's the mayor. Thank you.
All right, and the second one goes to Captain Travis Liska. Engineer Adam Brown, like I said, he's out tonight. Chase McChesney, you guys want to step out here and leave stuff alone in the mayor's office? They're intrigued with the 1980s radio in the Charger.
That's why I put it in there.
Yeah, I told him, I said, it's like one of the first ones. You could do some damage with that thing too. So, again, this is for their efforts for a Republic resident that lived on Lee Street here in Republic. They received a 911 call, and when they arrived, he was in full cardiac arrest. His wife was performing CPR on him. At that time, our staff took over CPR, and they inserted an airway. They actually shocked this gentleman 3 times before we got him back. And as we were loading him into the ambulance, he had a pulse and was somewhat breathing on his own. So, Travis, you get to go first.
Congratulations. Number 2 for you, huh?
Number 2 for Travis, yeah.
Thank you very much. Congratulations. And Chase. We're going to take about a 5-minute recess so we can go take a picture with her. Well, he says 3 minutes. We'll see if he's right.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, there she is. She had to drive the other shirt. Yeah.
I don't know where they used to try and put them in here. It just didn't work. Are you planning on going to the MML fall conference?
I go to the prosecutor. Yeah, that's the attorney. There's an insurance one. It's so fun. You ready to get yourself a hit? Yes. Why not? These things are driving around. That's the GMC.
I was hoping you would go.
I go 5'3".
But that's all right.
I bought a 79 Trans Am. You did.
The
Black, my chain was silver, but I'm on
Bluegrass Festival
charcoal. I saw silver. Did you take it over,
is
Robbins?
like
I did.
MML.
I thought I saw it. That was me.
It's the third week. It's the MML is like,
Says the ONC 88.
if you remember, like 3 days of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and
It's
then
leaking
the
blood.
Bluegrass
Behind that
Festival.
gate. I need to get
And so I don't have any. Last year what I did was I just went for the main stuff and then came back here.
You don't. You don't do an engine swap? I can't find somebody who can do an engine swap. I don't need it anytime soon, but
Okay. That's what I was gonna do.
79 Trans Am. Somebody that buy it. He's a mechanic for rigs. He's got that part.
Okay. Thank you all. Now we'll move on to citizen participation. Anyone wishing to speak to anything not on the agenda, please step to the podium, state your name and address, and you'll have 5 minutes. Anyone wishing to speak to anything not on the agenda? Seeing none, citizen participation is closed. I have a motion and a second for the approval of the consent agenda.
Motion. Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries 7-0. On to boards, commissions, and committee schedule. As of note, the city council meetings, next one will be May 15th, 2018, followed by the first one in June, which will be June 5th, 2018. Moving on to old business, I need a motion and a second for the second reading of bill number 18-21.
Motion.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? That motion carries 7-0. Ms. Brenda?
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Republic, Missouri approving the final plat of the Monte Cristo Phase 3 subdivision.
Thank you. I need a motion and a second for final passage of bill number 18-21.
Motion. Second.
Have a motion and a second. Ms. Haynes?
Thank you. This is the final plat and final consideration for 32 lots, or approximately 8.59 acres of single-family residential lots in Monte Cristo.
Any questions, comments, concerns from council before we move on to a vote? Seeing none, roll call vote.
Councilmember Franklin?
Aye.
Councilmember Duran?
Aye.
Councilmember Dykeman?
Aye.
Councilmember Brashears?
Aye.
Councilmember Jones?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilson?
Aye.
Councilmember Self?
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. Need a motion and a second for the second reading of bill number 18-22.
Motion.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? That motion carries 7-0. Ms. Brenda?
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Republic, Missouri to amend Title IV of the Republic Municipal Code Land Use, Section 405.600, General Access, Design, Surfacing, and Loading Standards by amending subsection C, Surfacing, to add a new subdivision 2 and 3.
Thank you. Need a motion and a second for final passage of bill number 18-22.
Motion. Second.
Have a motion and a second. Do we have any questions for Mr. Tyson? We went over this at the last meeting in our first read.
Actually, I did have a question, Mayor.
Mr. Franklin?
What exactly is the purpose of the 6-foot privacy fence in between, versus having the concrete versus the crushed gravel? What exactly is the purpose of having the fence when you have gravel versus concrete?
The purpose is to provide a visual screen between, and this is, you could say between neighboring property owners, but generally the principal thing you're screening against is view from a public street or a public way of any sort. And the screen is really intended not just to separate from the gravel so much as the use contained within that. This is specific to what would be wrecked vehicles or parts of vehicles stored that normally wouldn't be permitted. But this would sort of allow for those things to be contained behind a screen, and then you don't have to pave that area. So the benefit you get, you have to put in a screen, but then the benefit is you don't have to pave.
So if it was paved, there is no line, no requirement for
Well,
screening. You kind of see what I'm saying? Like if you
Yeah.
were to push down gravel, you're required to put up a screen, but if you have concrete, you're not required to have anything. So you could have a wrecked vehicle on concrete and everybody sees it, but if you put it on crushed gravel, you're required to screen it from view.
potentially.
That was just kind of the only thing that I really saw was it's kind of unfair to hold one responsible while the purpose of it is to screen from view, while concrete doesn't have to have it and gravel does. So I'm just kind of confused as to why one person does and the other doesn't.
Yeah, potentially that could be the result.
Obviously, we're not talking about a small section, though. We're talking about a large section, right? So if you're doing a concrete large section, there's a lot of investment going into a particular piece of land or use per se. I mean, I get why we would want to screen. I'm not like the gravel wise. As long as there's something to prevent it from just being chat all over, that I get the reason for it. I'll just leave it at that. So.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns from council? Seeing none, roll call vote.
Councilmember Self?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilson?
Aye.
Councilmember Jones.
Aye.
Councilmember Brashears.
Aye.
Councilmember Dykeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Duran.
Aye.
Councilmember Franklin.
Nay.
Motion carries 6-1. On to new business. Need a motion and a second for the first reading of bill number 18-23.
Motion.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries 7-0, Ms. Brenda.
An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Republic, Missouri approving the final development plan of the Frisco Square Village Plan Development District and the preliminary plat for Stage 1.
Thank you, Mr. Tyson.
The Frisco Square Village Plan Development is a PDD zoning, and just to be clear from the very beginning, if you remember, we just recently amended our PDD regulations. This is a plan development district that is regulated according to the former plan development district regulations, not the ones that we currently have in place that were adopted just a few months ago. The preliminary development plan for this particular development, which is in essence the zoning for this development, was approved back in 2006. Those preliminary development plans do not expire, and so that preliminary development plan approved all those years ago remains valid today. The developer, since that time, has now come back with a final development plan, which is required by those former procedures. You start with a sketch plan, then you get your zoning established with your preliminary development plan, but then before you can actually begin development, you still have to come back to council and file a final development plan to particularize your plans for development for that, either that phase or for the entire development. So that is what this developer has submitted here. The question when you're reviewing a final development plan is to review that final development plan in comparison with the preliminary development plan to determine whether there is substantial conformity and to answer any other questions that may be presented in order to firm up that development before it's permitted to proceed towards actual construction of infrastructure and platting of lots, subdivisions, selling, building, all those things of that nature. In this particular development plan, what you have is a preliminary development plan that permitted a land use, residential land use at a density of up to 11 dwelling units per acre. The preliminary development plan that was illustrated back in 2006 was a higher density residential use closer to that 11 dwelling units per acre, although that was just a ceiling, that was a maximum. It also illustrates the location of some private recreational amenities. It included private streets, and it also included some attached row homes, townhomes is what the illustration sort of depicted there. But if you actually look at the regulations, it doesn't actually say that it has to be like the illustration shows in order to be in substantial conformity. They set some maximum limits, and then they provided that illustration. But the final development plan that's being presented tonight is different from that illustration, but staff's review of it believes it's still in substantial conformity. So I want to go over some of the changes, just in case you're looking at that older illustration and wondering why does it look so different. The first phase of in the final development plan, which is phase 1, the one that you see that has a preliminary plat associated with it, is actually a single-family detached residential use. That is, all of the lots in there are 8,000 square feet or larger. Some of them are consistent with the R1M or the R1H zoning districts. So you see a conventional single-family sort of residential arrangement in phase 1 that is very detailed in terms of how they've designed that. The other remaining phases are sort of left to be determined in the future, but they would still be governed by that preliminary development plan. The developer will have to come back with either preliminary plats or a new phase of the final development plan in order to particularize the design of those particular developments, but it would still be allowed to develop in the same way with that maximum density of 11 dwelling units per acre. Instead of having private amenities and private streets, this final development plan includes public streets and the dedication of a 5-acre public park. City staff did communicate with the developer all throughout the development of this design. It was staff's opinion that both of those changes were actually beneficial in this particular setting. in staff's experience, under these conditions, those private amenities, not having any guarantee of there being, a stable HOA or anything like that, were very likely to become something that the city would have to intervene regularly in order to, sort of force maintenance on those sort of things. So rather than deal with that headache, what we did was come to an agreement for the dedication of a public park, 5 acres. The developer will install the trail amenity and the landscaping that you see in the development design there. And then we'll dedicate that to the city, either with the development of a future phase or within 3 years, whichever comes first. And then the city will have that park, and it will be available to the residents of this development, and any other member of the public could use it as well. So the question that remains with this particular one, and one that the Planning and Zoning Commission wrestled with a little bit at their hearing as well, is the preliminary development plan states that the developer will be responsible to improve a section of Miller Road along its northern boundary. That it goes east-west right across the northern boundary there. So it says the developer is going to, but it's silent on the timing of when that's going to happen. So now that this final development plan plans to develop in phases, timing becomes important. Are you going to improve Miller Road in the first phase, the second phase, or at the very end? The development plan that's submitted for your review tonight says that the developer will improve Miller Road upon the development of the 10-acre tract that's in the northwest corner of the development. So it sort of pushes the improvement of that all the way to that one particular phase. And since the timing of the phases isn't determined, if that becomes the last phase, staff's concern and our recommendation to the Zoning Commission was it would not be wise to allow that improvement to be deferred to the last phase. In our experience, what we've seen is if you allow the improvements to be deferred to the last phase, there's just a lot more exposure there, a lot more risk that if things don't go as planned, then you have that entire capital improvement, which in this case could be valued as anywhere between $250,000 to potentially $400,000 worth of improvements. You've now loaded that all onto one 10-acre tract. And whether a developer can actually afford to develop that 10 acres and pay for that at the same time is questionable. And so if it doesn't happen, then the city, the community, is left having to figure out how to make that happen, because it's just not feasible any longer for the private developer to make it happen on their own. So staff's recommendation was let's not defer it till the last phase. That's too risky. Ultimately, what the Planning and Zoning Commission recommended to the council was rather than pushing onto the developer or forcing any sort of agreement in terms of securing those improvements over time, Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendation was let's just let phase 1 go forward, and then before the city will improve any other phases, then we won't allow any other phases to move forward until we have some sort of arrangement made for how Miller Road's going to happen. So it doesn't necessarily answer the question of whether it gets deferred to the last phase or not. It just means nothing will be secured with phase 1, which is the largest of all the phases. So that remains a question. Staff's recommendation on this is the same, that I believe it's much better if this is secured proportionately over time. As things move, we secure it, and there's a variety of different ways we could potentially do it. But Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendation, to be clear, was to not require any sort of security now and deal with that issue later, sort of kick the can, so to speak. So I've said a lot about that, so if you have any questions or if any of that wasn't clear, I'm happy to provide more information.
Mr. Wilson.
So how long is it going to take phase 1 to be done? 3 years, 4 years?
That's really difficult to say. There's no guarantee that it happens in any particular time, but if they begin immediately on phase 1, and when you say done, you mean the roads are there and the lots are ready to sell, or all the homes are built?
Right.
If the final development plan is approved tonight, they could move toward getting an infrastructure construction permit immediately. That process could take, several weeks. and then they could be out there building infrastructure this summer, and potentially have final platted lots to sell next spring, or maybe potentially even sooner than that. There's no guarantee that that's how quickly things go, but that would be one likely scenario.
So is it going to take them 3 years before they move to the next phase?
Could.
And the road, Miller Road, where does that come in at? There's a need for that road to be built out, especially if the college does go ahead and build. So there's kind of a little crunch in there as I see it.
If the way the final development plan is written right now, Miller Road would not be improved until they began to develop that 10-acre tract. Now, when that happens is not determined. So it could be 3 years from now, or it could be 10 years from now. It could be 20 years. There's no guarantee as to when that particular phase happens,
So
the way it's written now.
Right, so what happens if they build a college and they need that road? They're just gonna have to do without it until they get around to doing something about it?
That particular section of it would not be there. That's correct.
Mr. Franklin?
I have a question. What exactly are the improvements to be done on Miller Road?
It needs to be, well, structurally it probably needs to be rehab, but it needs to be widened. Right now, Miller Road is, we call it a go path, but you couldn't pass 2 cars on it. So it needs to be widened. It needs to have curb and gutter installed and buried storm sewer.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns from council?
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Cameron?
So we've discussed this property at length, and there's a rich history tied to this that I actually have some sympathy for the developer on the property. As it was, there was a time whenever the bubble hit, and obviously then there was a time when multifamily was not to be done, or even communicated to that extent. And so the challenge with the way it's presented, if we do nothing, we end up like we have at Republic Commons right behind Arby's, and that's not a good situation because we need to extend that street. That'll open up more doors. Same time is the reason Republic Commons is sitting there is because the bubble hit, and so people couldn't finish the money. So it's kind of that who puts it in and who doesn't. And so what could happen is the developer puts that in and it sits there for 20 years and he can't sell his lots, but he's got the exposure to that street. I don't think that's a win-win. And I think the climate has changed, and I think, as we discussed today, I think there's a way, and I believe what the developer is doing here is trying to show good faith on phase 1 to build single-family dwellings rather than multifamily, which was trying to meet the spirit of what was being done, whatever, before. And then in phase 2 is more of a multifamily approach to form more of a step to the development. But I still believe that the city cannot be left exposed long-term without a street. So the idea would be, is what we discussed today, would be as the developer makes, to assess a fee or to assess the proportionate share of the street as they sell each lot and pay that, and we hold that in an interest-bearing account or of some nature. And whenever it moves on to the next one, then if they stop on the first phase, we could potentially have, say, I think we figured, I'll use math, $33,000 a lot. It'd be almost like $130,000 that we would have in some holdings. So if they walk away from the development, then you still have some money. So you're building cash. It's almost requiring the developer to put away cash rather than selling the lots, moving off, and nothing's done. Because you got somewhere, there's going to have to be some level of give and take versus saying, hey, you got to do this. Because he can walk away and we still need to do Miller improvements. So it's kind of more of a partnership of how do we get there. As he makes money on the sale of those lots, he could sock away with. We would hold it in trust and write up an agreement or an instrument that would get us there. I think that'd be a fair compromise, rather than saying he shouldn't have to the developer should put nothing up. I don't agree with that, because we're left, just like with Republic Commons, staff's left to figure out how do we build a street to create more development. So the taxpayer's gonna foot that bill. I think in this situation, there's a way to get there through some level of holding as the sale of lots happens, and it'll allow them to move on the first phase. Then on the second phase, they're required to build it or do some level of adjustment. And that would be the type of amendment that I would request that we be made. Now, I'm not sure if the developer would be open to this, but if not, that'd be the only way we could recommend approval without some sort of criteria. But we can't fix the past of how it's been done. I can just say that the city needs to move forward in a way that partners with the development rather than saying it's yours to bear now because of what, he's been sitting on his property for a long time and there's been a lot of action taken, legal action, and I think that this would be a good faith effort to partner together. And that would be the recommendation for an amendment that we've entertained.
One more question. On this, it says Crawford Mace Properties LLC is giving consent to Lone Star Development LLC for development of Phase 1 of Frisco Square Planned Development District. Will that have any effect on?
Legal.
If we were to do so, if council were to recommend some type of amendment, as David is speaking of today, that would be incorporated. My recommendation would be to incorporate that into the final development plan. That way it runs with the land, it runs with the development. That way, you know, the developer, whoever it is now or whoever it is in the future, will know what the requirements are for this development going forward.
I just don't want to see the city ended up holding the bag, as it were. So,
Which is why I think if we would capture a fee per lot and hold it, we're actually setting on some level of funding should the developer walk away from phases 2 or 3 or it takes 10 years, we would at least have that initial, based upon acreage or whatever, we'd have some level of funding. That if we needed to move on Miller, we have some level to move with it. There's not a, hey, we'll wait and see and then we're left. Because I look at Republic Commons of what not to do. And we need that street, it should have went all the way through, but at the same time, I can understand why a developer has that loan with a bank or someone, and all of a sudden the bubble goes and they're holding the bag on all that. And I understand someone say that that's the cost of doing business. I just think the market's changed, or the cycle's changed. I think that it would lend itself to the way we've been doing these developers agreements before, where we're saying as you sell a lot, you pay us back. I think in the same situation, as you sell a lot, you put money in holding. It's just kind of like a same process we were doing.
I can go with that.
But I don't think that we're at an insurmountable pass here. I think we can find a way to make this work. And I think, in my opinion, the best thing about this is it is in the spirit of what we've been doing. And the PDD alone gives the owner of the property more rights to their property to develop it how they want. And that's what we've been all about, and that's what that's why we've seen the growth of the city. So I think it's a good job.
It is, and I think I commend the developer, whoever is the developer here.
Yeah.
I commend you for changing that to a residential to provide that, and then the 5 acres, we don't want to be a barrier to your development. I understand there's been a history of some challenges. And I appreciate you bringing those single-family dwellings to try to blend and have a step zoning or approach to, it's not step zoning, but kind of a step to the build-out, and trying to reach that with single-family, not all multifamily. And so I hope we can work that out and create an amendment as we move forward. It may not be palatable for you, but that would be a win-win I think for us, and that'd be the recommendation we'd have to work out something between now and the second reading if that's possible.
Mr. Shears?
Is there any plans on Miller Road to extend that out again to Highway 60?
No, it would not intersect with Highway 60. It would actually turn southwest and would become Frisco, and Miller Road would become the same. Frisco Boulevard, and they would join together, and that would become one thoroughfare. That would extend from Colorado all the way to Main Street.
Mr. Jones?
Specifically about the park that's being mentioned for development, is that also part of, does that run in conjunction with Phase 1? They're totally separate entities, but will that be developed at the same time as Phase 1?
No, it will be developed either with the development of Phase 2, whichever phase it ends up being Phase 2, or 3 years. Whichever comes first.
These other phases first.
Oh, okay. Within 3 years, or?
After 3 years.
After 3 years,
Yeah.
okay. How much input will our Parks Department have on what equipment is put into that park?
Yeah, go ahead.
We've already had a lot of input just in the makeup of the trail, the lay of the trail, and the landscape. We're not calling for developers or to build for any further development. point, been very helpful, so appreciate that.
Good. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns from council? Seeing none, remember this is a first read. If you have any questions between now and the next meeting, please get with Mr. Tyson or Mr. Ison or Mr. Cameron for that matter. With any questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We had a very short agenda, so we don't have any resolutions. At this point, we're going to move on to reports from staff. Mr. Cameron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say, it's pretty cool to sit here and watch our high school students. That's twice now in the last, 4 months where we've had a run where they've raised money for the new animal shelter. And then in this situation, I know what was driving Jared. I know it was the community nets where we got vandalism out at the AMP and the memorial. And I just think that to see the teenagers coming up and stepping up and finding ways to help do that instead of saying, hey, city, find the money, do that. They're becoming partners and doing things with it. I just think that's great stuff. That's what it's all about, and I appreciate that, and Mr. Forrester for his work. I think us honoring that is a good thing. It's just kind of cool to see. Just some quick updates on Flat Creek. The staff is close. You'll see in the report that we're about 50% done with the water line. It's going very fast. They're doing a lot of good work out there. The utility locations on Hines and Oakwood are 75% complete, and I think the bid letting has been moved to August 1st. Does that sound correct, staff? Anyone? Yes, okay. And so the objective in talking to Andrew today is try to get that at some level of construction before school starts so people can get acquainted with the traffic patterns. But it's going to take a high communication effort from the city as to how that's going to be, but there's still going to be a lot of challenges. But it leads me to the point that the city has hired a new PIO, which will start at the beginning of June. This is the city's first ever public information officer. We have hired Mr. Mike Landis, who currently is working for KY3. He is notified his employer, so I can release that. So Mike Landis will be coming to join our team in about 30 days. And so we're going to put him to work very quickly on a number of projects. Specifically, he's going to get Hines and Oakwood. And we'd like to hear the community's feedback on that project. Right now, also, the city is conducting a survey. It's online. We'd encourage you to use your social media accounts, whatever you can, to encourage people to go online. Is it still? How long is it still in there, Garrett? How many? 3 weeks. And so this is important because this is all part of the comprehensive plan. We're looking for feedback and input of what the community is looking for, so we can incorporate into the overall plan and direction for the city and the comprehensive plan. And so, looking forward to getting that information. Usually those are very telling. And lastly, the council, every Thursday at 8:15, we are conducting now what we call a team huddle, a city huddle at the community center. And it's for 30 minutes, and I would just welcome the council members for 30 minutes just to come out and see what's going on. But all the staff are invited. It's just kind of an update. What we do is we go through different departments, give updates of what they do, and it brings all the city staff into a meeting that had the opportunity to come and listen to what's going on in the city. I provide about a 10-minute update. I know Councilmember Franklin showed up last week for introduction, so from 8:15 to 8:45 you're available. Stop by and see it and just kind of see what's going on if you get a chance. But other than that, that's all I have.
All right, thanks, sir. Moving on to Mayor's report. The first thing I would say is I want to commend the staff, especially community development. I know as we grow and things become easier on developers, that we still see some people that come in and they're used to the old way, and any single problem can be, well, it's just the way Republic is, or it's the old Republic. And we see and we know that that's not the case, that things have definitely changed, and we hear way more good than we ever hear bad now, which is a great thing. And it's important, just like tonight with this PDD, it's important that we give people the ability to use their land. It's not the government's land to say you can and can't do it, but we have to have some guidelines so that things are safe. The next thing I would bring up is we all received an email, the staff, and the council, and I wanted to bring it up in the council meeting because it was addressed to every one of us, and it was regarding newspapers, or not newspapers, some kind of papers that were thrown into driveways. And I told the gentleman that I wouldn't discuss that via email because we were all involved, and that could become a sunshine law issue, so that we would pass that on to staff for some just to look in to see what we could do. So I've talked to Mr. Ison, and I'm going to turn over to him so he can, the complaint was that these papers are not solicited, they're not asking for them, they're having to pick them up, and that should be considered littering. So they asked the city to step in and do something regarding that, so I'll turn it over to Mr. Ison with that.
Once the mayor let me know about the citizen concern, I did a little bit of preliminary research to let you guys know the legal side of it, because believe me, this is a very complicated legal issue dealing with newspapers, First Amendment rights, freedom of the press, things along those lines. So, basically, this is not an issue that is just impacting our city. Cities all across the United States are dealing with the same issue with citizens' complaints about newspapers that are coming unsolicited. There is a significant amount of federal litigation that's going on right now. It's never made it to the U.S. Supreme Court, but it will make it there before too much longer. So basically, I just want to let you guys know a little bit about the legal aspect of it. Obviously, we all know the First Amendment gives the right to free speech. There's absolutely no doubt in that. That applies to religious, political, but it also applies to commercial speech, which would be newspapers. And they've also found that circulating the newspaper is a fundamental right to freedom of press under the First Amendment also. Now, it's important to remember, and I think the citizens also need to know, we as the government, we cannot prohibit them from circulating their newspapers. We cannot tell them they cannot throw that. We cannot tell them they cannot put it in the yards. We cannot do that. That's a clear violation of the First Amendment. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. If the city were wanting to look at restricting this somehow, though, there's been some recent litigation in the appellate courts that have basically not yet firmly said that cities can do it, but are leaning towards the fact that cities can impose some reasonable restrictions on it. Instead of just throwing an unsolicited newspaper in a yard, they could require it to be put on a door. They could require it to be put in a mail slot if it's not owned by the post office. They could require it to be put between the door and the screen door, basically ways to keep it from being a littering type perspective. Again, reading the complaint that the citizen had, I don't think that's going to address his concern, because they just did not want the newspaper in the first place. But I can tell you, obviously it's up to you guys if you guys want to bring this up at a full council meeting to discuss it, propose some type of ordinance, provide something for the city, but we cannot prohibit it as the government. It's just not going to be allowed. So.
The only question I have is when in Republic, when you're doing door-to-door soliciting, of course you have to have the background check and you have to have the solicitor's license. When they're tossing the papers in the driveway, of course, I guess they're exempt from any sort of background check.
Right.
Once they come onto the door, though, would they then be required for a background check like a solicitor would be?
I don't believe so, because they're not truly soliciting anything. They're not, coming there to sell them something in particular. They're coming in order to, put whatever unsolicited newspaper it is on that door to comply with our ordinances. Now, again, I want to caution everybody that even imposing these restrictions on it have led to significant litigation for cities all across the United States, and still not an issue that's been resolved, but the appellate courts have been leaning towards that's acceptable. But again, I don't think that addresses the citizens' complaint about they just don't want to receive it at all.
Right. So. And nonetheless, if we were to try to take any kind of an action that would enact an ordinance to require it to be placed on a door or inside of a screen door, that hurts the people who are legitimately selling papers to these residences, and now they have to get out and go up, and that's just not reasonable, in my opinion. So I just wanted to make sure we brought that up, because we all received the email. I wanted it to be out in the open on YouTube, that it wasn't, so it's not a sunshine law issue. And the last thing I have is I want to congratulate all of our firefighters that were here tonight with their life-saving awards. It's pretty awesome to see a number of them had 2, and Captain King, had 3? Correct. 3 saves. That's a big deal. I mean, those are 3 lives that he saved, and we don't. Again, I think we get away from that with our police officers and firefighters, and we think they're only there for us to call when we need them, but they do a great service to our community, and think about the number of lives that were saved just tonight that we recognize. So congratulations to them, and thank you. I'm going to move on to council reports. Mr. Bashirs.
Go first tonight. Usually to go around, it's about, I agree with the past 6 or 8 people what they said. I want to thank everyone that was involved with the city cleanup. That was unbelievable. I've never seen so many piles of trash and mattresses and railroad ties and unbelievable. I put out no grill, I believe it was Friday night,
Yeah.
and looked out, 10 minutes later, it was gone. So, I don't know if someone stole it or if someone picked it up, but anyway, it was gone. But, very good. And how many tons was it? 200 and, I got an email from someone.
150, approximately 150 tons. That does not include the tires or the appliances.
Yeah, I read somewhere it was 200 and some odd ton. Goodness, a lot of trash. But
Yeah.
Good job.
Absolutely. Thanks, sir. Mr. Jones.
And to echo that from Charlie too, was
So,
the only thing that well, I'm glad you brought it up because, you know, there was some confusion about it because it did have to extend because it was so popular. Part of the confusion happened when people were continuing to take things to the street after their pickup had begun.
Yeah.
So maybe next year, whenever the next one is, there needs to be a little more communication. There will be one pickup on your street, a single point pickup.
Yes.
That will be.
Take it out the night before.
So, yeah, and by the way, if your grill was out there for 10 minutes, it wasn't the city that picked it up.
And the lawnmower and the weed eater.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Well, I'm glad to see that the high school people, kids are involved in the city. I think that's great. And the trash deal is a real good thing. I put a bunch of stuff out, and before Friday night was there, it was pretty much all gone. So, anyway, that's about it.
How much more stuff we didn't have to pick up, right?
Yeah, it'd have been
Next
300 tons.
Yeah. Mr. Self.
I too want to congratulate and then thank the firefighters for what they do. Those life-saving awards. I mean, yeah, it's a plaque and it looks nice, but to have that kind of level of I don't know, I don't want to say stress, but just, you know, to save someone's life. I don't know that there's a greater feeling. You know, I respect them a lot for what they do. So, also, I want to give a shout out to Tristan. I called with a couple issues with my water bill, and within an hour or two, he called back. Problem solved. Very polite, very responsive. So, give him a shout out. And then, lastly, I want to welcome Mike Landis as well. Clearly, Republic is the place to be.
Oh, boy. And real quick on that note, with the water department, there were some issues with people not being able to get through to the water department, but we found out with our antiquated system that thankfully is being replaced, that it was rolling over to nowhere. Just nobody was getting those phone calls, so after a few citizens called, we figured out real quick what the problem was and got that taken care of. So, Mr. Franklin.
I'd just like to, again, with all the high school students getting involved, that's very inspirational, and, that's very heartwarming to me, especially with the cameras over there at the Veterans Memorial. That's a very sacred, and that means a lot to a lot of different people in our community, and so keeping the vandalism out of there and stopping that is very important, so that we can have the amp, and we can have that, and we can have nice things, and so I'm very, very appreciative of Mr. Forrester. I guess he's left. But very thankful too for the life-saving awards. That's very comforting, to know that we have first responders that are willing to do what they need. One word I'm looking at this week is responsibility, and they have the ability to save our lives, and they respond. So I'm very, very thankful for everything that they give to us. The other thing that I would like to talk about too is the developer in the park. That's in the park and the development, it's a double bonus. So that's great. That gives people a chance to go somewhere and be loud and have fun, and so that's very encouraging, and I appreciate that. And the last thing I'd like to say is I did get to go to the huddle, and that's very interesting. I've appreciated that very much, and I'm going to do everything I can to make it to those, to meet you guys and see what you're working on, and kind of get that one-on-one time with you. So I'm very appreciative of that, and very thankful for everything everybody did in that meeting. But kind of all I had to say.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Ann.
Well, when you get down to this side, we just have to echo everything that everybody else said. So, great job to the firefighters. It's amazing to hear those stories, and I know several of them, and just really amazing people, along with the gentlemen in our enforcement. So, also excited about Mike Landis. That is really, really cool. So that was a fun email to get. And of course, thank you to Michael Forrester. That is just something that you don't hear much of with kiddos, and especially in that age range. And so it's just very exciting to see them stepping up and being a part of our community and trying to make it a little bit better. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Russell.
I need to apologize. My second meeting, I've stolen late. I want to apologize to everyone. My kindergartner, what did you already tell him?
No.
My kindergartner was graduating tonight. They had a performance, and I couldn't go home to upset 5-year-olds, so I'm sorry. You guys got outranked. So, I'm going to thank Brenda. Brenda Jackson's amazing. Thank you all for reaching out and being kind to me in my first 2 weeks in this role, but without Brenda, I mean, wow, I want to steal you away from here and come work with me. I think we may get used to things. I know I do in my professional job, but when you have somebody that can like just ease you into a new position just like crazy, that has been awesome. You have taken care of every problem I have come up with, and my job is to spot problems. So thank you. It's been a real joy to get settled in here, and I won't be late next time. So thank you.
Thank you. So we may have to put an ordinance on the next agenda, at least for a first read, that you're not going to be allowed to take Brenda in.
You know, you ought to think about that.
All right, Mr. Dykeman.
Well, I would, first of all, I noticed in the report that tonight that you and Eric are going to go to the MML meeting. I went to that last year, and it was very informative. They give you lots of information, but it was a good time. Got to meet a lot of people from other cities, and it was so. I mean, that's a good thing to go to. Then, of course, here again, staff. We've got the best staff in the world, and their accomplishments. But I was reading through the stuff here that Debbie did on our progress on the new software. I was involved quite a bit with it, and talking with them, they're getting excited about it, and I'm really looking forward to that coming into play, and it's going along great. Their classes have been good, and I think it's going to be not only to us and this employees, but to the citizens and what they're going to be able to access.
Yeah.
And look at on their own records.
And you know what else would be great is Charlie, Brenda, and I won't have to sign 3,000 checks a week either. You bet, Joe.
Oh, we took that option out.
Oh. That's okay. Okay, so if there's nothing else, I'm going to ask to go into executive session. No further action other than announcing adjournment by the mayor shall take place after an executive session that is scheduled as the last matter on the agenda, unless otherwise stated on the agenda or as allowed per RSMO 610.02. We will be covering RSMO 610.021.1, pending and or potential litigation, closed session, closed vote, closed record, and RSMO 610.021.3, hiring, fire, and promotion, or disciplining personnel, closed session, closed vote, closed record. Do I have a motion and a second to go into executive session?
Motion. Second.
Have a motion and a second. Roll call vote.
Councilmember Self?
Aye.
Councilmember Wilson?
Aye.
Councilmember Jones?
Aye.
Councilmember Brashears?
Aye.
Councilmember Dykeman?
Aye.
Councilmember Russell?
Aye.
Councilmember Duran?
Aye.
Councilmember Franklin?
Aye.
Motion carries 8-0. We will have a 5-minute recess and then go into executive session.
Give us 5 minutes.
So I was going to show pictures, but then